Sorry for the late start. We were waiting for CNN and ABC and CBS and MSNBC and NBC camera crews to get here. Their trucks were seen circling around Town Hall, but you know what parking's like in Seattle, so it's likely that sometime in the middle of this evening they're going to barge in. You know how the media are, so it's going to be really difficult for those of you in the $500 seats up front to see, but we'll take care of them. We interrupt this program from Town Hall in Seattle to bring you this breaking news story from TIBC, the Truth in Broadcasting Corporation, from our world corporate headquarters in a secret, undisclosed, underground location in Area 51 in Nevada. I'm Dick Veneer, your glib and banal anchor of Facade News, the 24/7 newscast dedicated to keeping you in the dark. Why are they laughing? Without fear or favor, we go straight to the surface of a story and we stay there. No one can beat our in-shallow reporting. We're inspired by the highest principles of journalism, unfair and unbalanced. We deceive, you believe. Ladies and gentlemen, an amazing story coming across our news desk. According to Eat the State, an obscure journal in Seattle, they are reporting that George W. Bush has been arrested. The president was found burrowed deep in a spider hole under Pioneer Square with a stash of World Wrestling Federation DVDs and a massive collection of Kenny G and Barry Manilow CDs, all with Iranian serial numbers on them. He was taken into custody by a heretofore unknown group calling itself SULF, the Seattle Liberation Front. Its spokesperson, one Mary Ann Mercer, said, "This action is long overdue. We're dedicated to nonviolence and did not use force on Bush, but we had to act," she said with great passion. "We could no longer wait for timid Democrats to enforce the law. Bush must face justice," she said, as her voice rose in anger. Bush was later to have reportedly defiantly shouted at his captors, "Do you know who I am? I am the decider. I am the commander guy. I am doing God's work on this earth. And God told me to strike Afghanistan, and I did. And God told me to strike Iraq, and I did. And God is telling me to strike Iran, and I will." And then, inexplicably, to everyone's surprise, he burst into tears and said, "I want my dad." Bush faces multiple life sentences if convicted for, among other things, violating the U.S. Constitution, the War Powers Act, the Nuremberg Principles, the Geneva Conventions, almost all of them, and the UN Charter. If convicted, he will serve his time in Guantanamo. You'll recall the infamous U.S. prison that was returned to Cuban sovereignty late in 2007. But he won't be alone. He'll have plenty of company. Already locked up and serving time there are such luminaries as Dick Cheney, Condoleezza Rice, Colin Powell, Donald Rumsfeld, Paul Wolfowitz, Elliot Abrams, Douglas Feith, Karl Rove, and Alberto Gonzalez. It looks like curtains for Bush. His head was bowed as he was led away by the blue-helmeted peacekeepers of SULF, the Seattle Liberation Front. Bush was heard whimpering, "Dick, Dick, Dick. Where are you, Dick, Dick, Dick?" I'm not that Dick. I'm the other Dick. I'm Dick Veneer, your still glib and banal anchor of Facade News, the 24/7 newscast dedicated to keeping you in the dark. Stay tuned to TIBC, Truth in Broadcasting, for updates on this breaking news story. And now back to Town Hall in Seattle for your regularly scheduled event. Good evening, Seattle. Hey, it's so great to be here. As you can see, I'm very sober and stolid and serious and academic. I don't believe there's any place for humor or levity. Things are direly bad, comrades, and gloom and doom, and the end is near. I think it's very important to use humor to kind of deflate some of that negativity and puncture some of the grief that sometimes enshrouds us with all of the negative news of war and rumors of war. I'm particularly glad to be here because of two radio stations, KUOW 94.9 FM, where you can hear alternative radio every Wednesday evening from 8 to 9, and KEXP 90.3 FM, where you can hear my weekly broadcast every Saturday morning if you get up bright and early from 6 to 7 a.m. And it's a thrill for me to connect a lot of people who have called or written and I've met over the years to see you here once again. And I do these kinds of tours not only to kind of spread the gospel and hopefully spread some information, but also I hope to be some kind of catalyst, some kind of inspiration, so that when I do leave, you who live in this community will pick up the baton and run with it and do something really creative to promote peace and justice. And I noticed today, of course, in the lobby that there are such groups right here in Seattle. There's a very serious situation with corporate control of the media in our country. It's something I've certainly been talking about for years now. It's hard to imagine that the FCC, which controls the nation's airwaves, putatively on behalf of the citizenry, but in fact on behalf of large corporate conglomerates and entities, is actually considering to further ease the merger and concentration regulations. I wasn't even aware that there were any left because of the tsunami of concentration that has occurred in the media. For example, Clear Channel, which was a few score radio stations in the early 1990s, now has something like 1,200. There's 5 corporations that basically control what Americans see, hear, and read. And there is now a proposal by the FCC chair, Martin, to make that, to enable even more concentration. So we have, government agencies that are supposed to regulate entities, corporations, on behalf of the citizenry, but we find just the opposite occurring. They are enabling the corporations and they're disabling the citizenry. Now, you have a chance here in Seattle to do something about this. Sometime in early November, there will be an FCC hearing here in Seattle about this proposed new change in regulations that the chair, Martin, wants to steamroll through. It's very important that you attend this meeting. Reclaim the Media, which is here in the lobby. ReclaimTheMedia.org will be announcing the time, date, and location of that FCC hearing, coming up. So, and you may have up to 2 minutes to express yourself before the regulators, and it's an opportunity to really express your views and to tell them how you feel about more media concentration. So ReclaimTheMedia.org, people acting locally and making a difference. I'm also very glad to see that there is the Stop the War, possible war on Iran. They're here with leaflets telling you what you can do to prevent that. I'm also particularly happy to be speaking at an event sponsored by one of my favorite bookstores, Elliott Bay. truly not just a Seattle and Washington resource, but a national resource. In this time of massive borderization and Barnes and ignoble ization. I don't know how they can dare call themselves noble. There's nothing noble about Barnes and Noble. It's about corporate profits. It's about driving out independent bookstores. It's about limiting selections, and it's about, controlling the market. And so these independent bookstores, like Elliott Bay, are islands where you can go, where you can hear voices like mine and many others, either in town hall or at the site of the store, where I've spoken several times as well. So chapeau bas to Elliott Bay, and I thank them for inviting me and the terrific work that they're doing. Well, we're very close to yet another military adventure by the United States, the Bush administration. Nancy Pelosi, why don't we just cut to the quick? Everyone loves Nancy, a grandmother, first woman, Speaker of the House, third in line to the presidency. As soon as the Democrats take over the Congress in November of 2006, literally the first thing out of her mouth that we hear is, impeachment is off the table. I thought this was a catastrophic error of judgment on her part. Why would she remove the one mechanism, the one technical restraint that could possibly box in or inhibit the Bush administration from launching yet another war? Now, I've kind of looked into this, in my role as an investigative journalist, but I still haven't figured out whether she got, free iTunes downloads for a year, or maybe a Starbucks certificate, or, some kind of free Domino's or Pizza Hut deliveries. I hope she got something for it. You don't give away the ace in your deck for nothing. And that's what she did. And if there was ever an administration in the lifetime of most of the people in this room that deserves to be impeached, it's the one that's sitting in Washington, D.C. right now. Rarely in American history, we don't get a lot of case studies where the evidence is so unambiguous, is so uncontroversial for impeachment, and yet it is not at all reflected in the political discourse. It has gone down Orwell's memory hole. And I think it's something that we need to be talking about. And when I talk about this issue, and I have been almost nonstop from Damascus, Tehran, Beirut, Istanbul, Manzanita, Oregon, Paonia, Colorado, Astoria, Oregon, Olympia, Washington, and now Seattle, Washington. People are very animated about it, and they do wonder, why isn't this being advanced? Why is not the Democratic Party and its leadership talking about accountability for some of the most grotesque war crimes ever recorded in American history? And when I say that, I know a little bit about American history, and the bar for war crimes is indeed very, very high. But the planning and waging of aggressive war is the supreme international war crime. And that is why German generals and high-ranking members of the Nazi hierarchy were prosecuted at Nuremberg for. FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, appointed Robert Jackson as the chief prosecutor for the Allied War Tribunal at Nuremberg, a very distinguished jurist. He was a Supreme Court justice, and he was very eloquent in his final speech, his closing summation. He said with great, I think with great compassion and accuracy, that if what we do here is not applied universally, then what the Germans are saying about us, the guys in the dock, they were saying, this is victor's justice. If we had won the war, you would be sitting here. But we lost the war, so we are being prosecuted. He said, if what we do here has any meaning for future generations, then there must be the principle of universality. It must be applied across the board. And he said that the planning and waging of aggressive war, even the threat of war, which is practically occurring every single day vis-a-vis Iran. If you read and hear the belligerent and bellicose statements coming from the White House about Iran threatening the World War III, a growing danger, the Iranian menace, the greatest national security threat in the world today, the number one state sponsor of terrorism. The United States should be very careful when it talks about states sponsoring terrorism, because in fact it has itself a long and current history of sponsoring terrorism. In fact, you see what's going on in northern Iran today. Good Kurds, bad Kurds. The Kurds that are attacking Turkey, they're bad Kurds. But the Kurds that are attacking Iran with our money and our weapons, they're good Kurds. So you see that kind of schizophrenia and that kind of double standard, which is not lost on people of the Middle East. We have one set of rules for the master. You know, what we say goes, the title of the new book with Chomsky. And for the master's subalterns and other acolytes, they have a permanent get-out-of-jail pass. Every time they pass go, they collect $200. But if you're on the other team, if you're a rogue state, if you're a designated enemy, if you're part of the axis of evil, then you go directly to jail. You never collect $200. You never get a get-out-of-jail pass, and you are constantly condemned. That's pretty much how the world has been operating for quite some time, particularly since the end of World War II, when the United States assumes global leadership. Now, why Iran? Why Iraq? Why the Middle East? Why are all the guns pointed there? Why are all the bases being built there? Why is the biggest embassy in the world being built in a country of 23, 24 million people, Baghdad, Iraq? There is a certain reason, there is a certain resource that is located in the Middle East. I've also done extensive research on this, and I've discovered that it is watermelons and pomegranates. For those of you, I know there's a lot of Iranian brothers and sisters here, you know that the pomegranates in Iran are of exceptional quality and of enormous value on the international market. I mean, it's just nonpareil. No one can come close to it. And then, of course, in Iraq, the watermelons are simply outstanding. And this is what is attracting such peace-loving corporations and environmentally green companies like ExxonMobil, Chevron, Texaco, British Petroleum, ConocoPhillips, Royal Dutch Shell, and then the Gandhian pacifist organizations such as Northrop Grumman, Boeing, Raytheon, Lockheed Martin, Sikorsky, General Dynamics, General Electric, and all the others, the military industrial complex. Now, I know I'm very tall, and perhaps many of you can't see what I'm wearing, but it happens to be a kurta, K-U-R-T-A. This is the national kind of dress for men in Bangladesh, India, Pakistan, Afghanistan, and South Asia in general. I was wearing this kurta at San Francisco Airport about 5 Fridays ago, as I now call them scareports. They should all be renamed. They have very little, well, there is air, there's hot air emanating from all of these so-called security agents who are just instilling fear, intimidation, and insecurity. So I'm walking through the scareport, going through security, and I'm asked to come over here. Come over where? Just come over here with us. We'd like to ask you a few questions and just go through your things, where you've been. So it's a complete search of my baggage, where you're going, where are you, who employs you, what do you do, these kinds of things. And then I figured out that, I was being sartorially profiled. This is perhaps now a new level of racial profiling. So not only if your name is Ali or Hussein or Ahmed or Mahmouda or Rashid or Rashida, if you even wear clothes that look like them, you risk the possibility of being interrogated and pulled over. So I managed to get through the scareport on that particular occasion. Now, I don't want people to get excited here. There's another little prop coming up. I told you. I understand. Again, I'm very tall, but this is a T-shirt that a marvelous peace organization in Albuquerque, New Mexico that I work with, stopthewarmachine.org, puts out to generate funds for its literature, for its demonstrations, for bailing people out of jail at its many civil disobedience campaigns. New Mexico, for those of you who don't know, is one of the most militarized states in the United States, and it is also the site of the two of the three labs where weapons of mass destruction are designed. At Sandia, right outside of Albuquerque, you can see them right on the Sandia Mountains, which actually means watermelon in Spanish, to connect with that great resource that attracts us. And the other one is just north of Santa Fe, called Los Alamos. And south of Albuquerque, literally within the city limits of Albuquerque, is Kirtland Air Force Base, which has 1,900 nuclear weapons of mass destruction. And so there's a bumper sticker that I don't have with me that says, "Weapons of mass destruction, Iran and Iraq 0, Albuquerque 1,900. And there's a joke going around in Albuquerque that if the city should secede, it would be the third largest nuclear power in the world after the United States and Russia. So, stopthewarmachine.org, you can go to their website. I'm giving a talk, this is last summer, in Denton, Texas. North of Dallas. I love to puncture stereotypes, and one of them is about Texas. There's a lot of interesting and counterculture things going on in Texas. There's a Pacifica station in Houston. There are peace movements in Austin and San Antonio, where I've been, and a wonderful peace and justice center in Denton, Texas. So they invited me to speak there, and I gave my talk. It was at 11 in the morning, early, and I kept my T-shirt on. I must say, not with great forethought or prescience. And so I walk into the Dallas airport wearing this T-shirt. Now I notice almost immediately I'm getting very hard stares. So, is it my figure? Is it my bust line? I'm kind of thinking, what is attracting this? And then I kind of figured out this might not have been the best T-shirt I could have worn for this scareport. At the same time, I notice hundreds and hundreds of soldiers in the main terminal. I find out that they have just returned from Iraq, or Iraq, as they mispronounce it. They've just returned from Iraq. They're soldiers of the 10th Mountain Division out of Fort Drum, New York. And I'm getting, the looks again. And some of them come over to me and, start talking and trying to engage in civil discourse. And on the back of this T-shirt, I know we're on camera and on mic, so I'm not going to go off mic and off camera, but it says, "Ike was right about the military-industrial complex." And these soldiers, who are 17, 18, 19 years old, asked me, "Who's Ike?" Which allowed me to explicate a little bit, show off my high school education. He was a 5-star Allied commander of all troops in Europe, leader of the D-Day invasion. You could see, whoa, dude, he was heavy. The eyebrows went, like they're nodding at one another. He was also a 2-time president of the United States, happened to be a Republican. And on January 17th, to go to the point now, on January 17th, 1961, as he's exiting the White House, he gives a rather extraordinary speech in which he warns the country of something, in his words, the first time this term is used, a military-industrial complex, is developing in the United States, and Eisenhower felt that this was something that warranted the attention of the citizenry. It could have very infelicious consequences if it were allowed to be developed, unattended to and unsupervised. We have the original draft of Eisenhower's farewell address, by the way, and in the original it says military-industrial congressional complex. The congressional is crossed out. Apparently some of his aides told him, these are guys you may have to work with or play golf with in the future. They owe you, you owe them. Why don't you just leave that out? And so he crosses that out. In the next paragraph, he tells the American people that this is not a permanent condition. If the citizenry is aware and knowledgeable about what's going on, that can be the greatest force to prevent the further concentration of power in the military-industrial complex. Well, imagine if Eisenhower were around today and looking at this military-industrial complex. I like to flatter myself. I think I'm somewhat educated and knowledgeable. For years, I've been speaking at, in audiences and on the radio and talking about the United States has over 100 bases in over 100 countries. And that was the standard figure I was giving. I didn't realize I was off by a factor of 7. The United States has 737 bases and installations around the world. And if you divide the 190 member states of the UN into 737, you'll come out to about 3 or 4 per country. Korea, 54 years after the end of the Korean War, is still occupied. U.S. troops and Air Force and naval personnel remain in Europe 62 years after the end of World War II. These guys get located and they don't leave. They're not planning on leaving Iraq. They're building baseball fields. They're building bases that are permanent, that have all the accoutrements that Americans are used to, including Wendy's and Burger Kings and bowling alleys and tennis courts and swimming pools and Kmarts and Targets and all the rest. These are enormous investments of capital. And so I think we should be very leery when we hear about, possible withdrawal from Iraq. I think that's highly improbable, given the capital investment and the emotional investment that the United States, the elite, not the people of the United States, the people who run the country. We're just here as bystanders. We're supposed to show up and vote for one of the 2 millionaires that show up on the ballots every 2 and every 4 years. Jimmy Carter and others go to third world countries and, is monitoring, how democratic are elections. I think we need those kind of monitors here in this country, which is awash in corporate capital. It's a system of the highest bidder. The corporations buy all the candidates, and then they have, slight differences in nuance between the different candidates. There's virtually no disagreement on strategy. You see that about Iran, you see it about Iraq, you see it about Afghanistan, you see it about Israel. The only difference is tactics. How do we do it? Should we use B-52s or F-16s? Should the Marines have an amphibious landing, or should there be the use of paratroopers? And then they have the debate. On the NewsHour with Jim Lehrer, or on Morning Edition, or All Things Considered. Now I'm talking about, the elite left liberal electronic media. Those are the kinds of discussions that go on, and no one is talking about U.S. hegemony. No one talks about resources. No one talks about reality. They are in a fantasy world enabled by anchors who don't speak Arabic, don't know anything about Arab culture or history or Iraq or Islamic civilization. You have someone like Leanne Hansen on Morning Edition. I'm sorry, I know people love Leanne Hansen. She does this wonderful bit bit with Will Shortz around puzzles, and she's so charming. Recently, we learned in her introduction to Will Shortz 2 Sundays ago that she had been to Venice on her vacation. How wonderful, how privileged she is. You know, like so many Americans, just hop on a plane and go to Venice. She did say she did get her ankles wet. You know, there is a problem with rising water there, but she managed to, you know, step over the puddles and keep her feet dry. Meanwhile, people like Martin Indyk just dance around Leanne Hansen. I'll just give you one example, which is in the Chomsky book. This is now, we're cutting now to Hezbollah in Lebanon. This is in September of 2006. The Israeli assault on Lebanon has just ended. And Indyk, who is in fact a former U.S. ambassador to Tel Aviv and a former member of AIPAC, the American Israel Public Affairs Committee, arguably the most powerful lobby in Washington, is not identified as such, by the way, and he's introduced as a senior fellow at the Brookings Institution, and he says that the United States has a blood debt with Hezbollah. And so Leanne Hansen says, well, what is that? Hezbollah is responsible for the murder of 241 Marines in Beirut in 1983. Now, there's a slight chronological problem here. For those of you who are aware of history in Lebanon and in the Middle East, Hezbollah did not exist as an organization until 1985. So how can it be held responsible for something that happened in 1983? And so this enters the aquifer. It's regurgitated on other programs. It gains currency, and it is now repeated ad nauseum throughout the political discourse with no challenge whatsoever. It's just becomes part of the discussion. Last Sunday, or was it the Sunday before, she had on Ivan Watson. I feel like it's like shooting fish in a barrel. It's almost unfair to be talking. There's such easy targets, but you know, I feel it's important to talk about the elite media. There's no virtue in my critiquing Sean Hannity or Anderson Cooper or Glenn Beck or any of these other, talk show hosts. It's just too easy. There's no merit in that. I think it's more important to talk about the New York Times and the Washington Post and the NewsHour with Jim Lehrer and the Charlie Rose Show and Morning Edition and All Things Considered, simply because they have this authority. You know, they're very serious. They seem to have command of the English language. They know the difference between adverbs and adjectives. They speak in complete sentences. Am I being too cruel? And they don't shout. You know, they wait until someone finishes, and then, you know, it's very civil. Thank you for being here. Wonderful to see you again, Bob. Thank you, Cokie Roberts. Great to be back. You know, so polite. It drives me crazy. I want to pull out all my false hair. So I think that's why, particularly in the Chomsky book, what we say goes is an extensive discussion of this kind of elite media. Last Sunday, I believe it was, I'm kind of in a time warp now because when you're doing one-nighters, the days kind of blur. But the most recent Leanne Hansen Sunday edition I heard was about the situation on the Turkish-Kurdish border. We learned from Ivan Watson, the NPR bureau reporter in Istanbul, that the Kurds are terrorists. They're killing Turkish troops. They're crossing the border. They're doing terrible things. They commit violence, seemingly for no reason at all. They're just violent. You know, those Middle Easterners. It's in our blood. You know, I'm from there, by the way. It's in our gene pool. We just take pleasure in randomly killing people. You know, it satisfies some atavistic primordial bloodlust that clearly we're endowed with by our Creator. Unlike the Europeans and their great history of Gandhian nonviolence throughout the 20th century and its successor civilization here in North America. So there's if you were to have landed, as Chomsky likes to always have this control, someone lands from Mars and turns on NPR and hears this report, we'll think these people are crazy. The Kurds, I mean, they're just violent. Why is this happening? No context, no background. You know how in real estate, any of you ever bought property, you know the realtors, their mantra, location, location, location. Well, with history, with politics, it's about context, context, context. And if you don't know what has happened, what is the locus for what is transpiring, you're completely lost and vulnerable to being manipulated. Yes, even you. And so you don't learn from Leanne Hansen, and she does not ask Ivan Watson, well, what could be motivating these people? And I'm thinking, well, now we're going to find out. You know, it must be that 5,000 to 6,000 Kurdish villages were razed to the ground by the Turkish military in the 1980s and 1990s. It must be that the Kurds have been a target of repression and oppression on a state level, official racism by the Ankara government. It can't be about tens of thousands of Kurds that were killed by Turkish military forces. No, they're simply wild, savage people. They enjoy killing for killing's sake. So you don't learn any of the history. You don't learn that the Kurds represent the largest population group in the world without a state. They straddle 4 countries, Iran, Syria, Turkey, and Iraq. You know, in Iraqi Kurdistan, which is now basically a de facto state, it's kind of part of Iraq, but anybody who's been there knows that it's already created its own infrastructure. If you go to the Turkish border, as I did, and look and talk to the people there, it's all Peshmerga. That is the Kurdish militia. They're all speaking Kurdish. There's a Kurdish flag. No Iraqis to be seen. No Arabic to be heard. No Iraqi flag to be seen. It is already a de facto state. This is one of the I would say one of the consequences of the divide and rule policy in the Middle East, and something that almost every single Middle Easterner that I spoke to that is in opposition to what is going on, not those that, you know, love the U.S. like Fuad Ajami and Kanan Makia and Irshad Manji and you know, other people like that, you know, if you're from there, you go to the front of the line because, you know, if you're a collaborator and one of them, you are immediately promoted on all the media as someone with great insight, you know, because you can say and pronounce je, you know, not like Katie Couric, who remembers Mahmoud Ahmadinejad's name by the mnemonic, I'm not a dinner jacket. She only earns $15 million a year. What do you want? Come on. I mean, do you have to know Farsi to be able to say Ahmadinejad? It's not that difficult. It just takes a little bit of effort and imagination. But, you know, that kind of thing, Iraq, Iran, the Taliban, Pakistan, all of that stuff, Saddam, that was the classic. You know, linking Saddam to, you know, the biblical memory of Sodom and Gomorrah was, I thought, lexical genius, something that Goebbels would have turned green with envy. Indeed, today, until today, people like Ted Koppel and others say Sodom, I may have to, like, you know, deprogram myself because I say Saddam. Saddam Hussein. They say Saddam Hussein until today. And Iraq. I think that's indicative of you know, the kind of contempt that some sectors of elites in the United States and in Europe have for them. You know, the people that wear funny clothes and have weird customs like, you know, not wanting their homes broken in the middle of the night and boots put on their heads and being yelled at in American slang that they can't understand. And so they're blown away at checkpoints all over Iraq. I mean, there was this big hullabaloo recently about Black Hawk killing 17 Iraqis. We have been talking about this. The people who have some information about what's going on in Iraq since the early days of the invasion and occupation. This has been de rigueur. It's been routine. Iraqis routinely being blown away at checkpoints by trigger-happy either GIs who can't speak a word of Arabic and know nothing about, the culture, and knowing that if you put your hand up like this in Iraqi kind of sign language, it means hi. It doesn't mean stop. And when the GIs do things like this, turn off your ignition key, they don't know what this is, and they kind of wave back and then they're opened up. So these kinds of shootings have been routine. When I was in Syria, I've been there a couple of times. Most recently in late June, I interviewed Iraqi refugees, and the stories are absolutely heartbreaking. And if I start thinking about them, I'll have trouble finishing this lecture. Very, very difficult kinds of things that are going on in a classic colonial racist war. We have privileged ourselves over them. They are dark, they are benighted, they are bedraggled. It's very much like Conrad in The Heart of Darkness. If you want to understand what's really going on, you should, read into the past, read into what the Belgians did in the Congo in one of the most rapacious mass murder campaigns ever conducted by any of the European colonial powers. And in Iraq, Iraq presents for the propaganda meisters in Washington a real opportunity, as does Iran. They're taking all the old talking points about Iraq and changing the Q in Iraq to an N, and they're just recirculating the same press releases about how Iran is now a great danger. Iran is getting weapons. Iran is going to attack us. Condoleezza Rice, who Cy Hirsch told me was the most incompetent national security advisor in the history of the United States, and he's been around and has seen almost all of them, is then promoted as to Secretary of State. She announced recently that Iran poses the greatest threat to the national security of the United States, and that that cliche that cascades from their mouths like just water, that it is the #1 state sponsor of terrorism. It's interesting how terrorism is quantified and qualified. Of course, state terrorism, which is enormous and is absolutely lethal in terms of killing massive numbers of people, as the United States has done in Afghanistan and Iraq. You'll notice that I don't leave out Afghanistan, because it has been totally marginalized, even by the peace movement. We're very virtuous about Iraq because it seems to be like such a clear-cut case of aggression, and it is. But it's not very different from the invasion and occupation of Afghanistan, which is unraveling itself. The Taliban is resurgent there, getting a lot of support from our moderate ally in Islamabad, General Pervez Musharraf. So Iraq is, we're now led to believe that Iran is a huge danger to the United States, a country that has 737 military bases around the world, that spends $750 billion on the military every year. I'm including the supplemental military bills that are passed, that are not officially part of the Pentagon budget. So if you add those in, it's close to $750 billion. What about the expenditure of this country that we should all be, whenever we hear its name, Iran, we should be trembling in our boots. We should be quaking with fear. I mean, I don't think we should leave the hall tonight. As I came in here, I noticed, the Iranian Navy right off the coast of Vashon and Bainbridge Island. It was very scary. And helicopter gunships flying over West Seattle, Alki Drive, I saw them today. Submarines surfacing. I mean, the brazenness of it. They just have no shame. They flaunt their military power with no respect for international law and basic human decency. How much does this so-called warmongering state, which has not attacked a country in 250 You know, you would be hard-pressed to go through our history, or their history, for more than 2.5 years where the United States has not committed some act of aggression. And if you include the Indian Wars, which began almost immediately and continued right up through Wounded Knee and Pine Ridge, you would almost say every year there was some kind of aggression and military action. You know, from Grenada to Chile, to Cuba, to Nicaragua, to Russia after the Bolshevik Revolution in 1917, and on and on and on. I mean, the history of the United States is largely hidden from the people of the United States. And I think if Eisenhower were alive today and making this statement about the military-industrial congressional complex, I would add the educational system and the media system as well to that, because it's all part of one fabric. We have an educational system that doesn't educate, doesn't teach critical analysis, doesn't teach people how to deconstruct arguments, and we have a media system that doesn't inform, that provides people with more information about K-Fed's divorce with Britney Spears and whether Jen Aniston has really recovered from Brad Pitt leaving her, and are Brad and Angelina really happy, and what about all those babies they're adopting, and is Michael Vick's football career over because he tortured and killed dogs, or should he be allowed to play football? Who is the real parent? Who's the real father of Anna Nicole Smith's baby? And those kinds of things, and will the Seahawks finally make it to the Super Bowl this year? Is this the year for the Seahawks to finally win the big trophy? I mean, these are the kinds of things. No. You see? Then Mike Holmgren, who is way overpaid, should be fired. And if you listen to, I haven't listened to the sports shows here, but I know if I would tune them in, you will find spirited and detailed discussions about every aspect of the Seahawks, the players. This player is so good, he should be given, a special award. This guy stinks, they should trade him or cut him and get rid of him. The coach is overrated. I mean, just an enormous amount of discussion. I'd like to see, people talk about Maria Cantwell like that, or, Pelosi again, and people like that. And I mentioned supplemental bills in the military, and now you see this kind of stream of consciousness delivery. There was an Iraq-Afghan war appropriations bill this past spring that had a sentence in it that said, the Bush administration cannot initiate military action against Iran without congressional approval. And, it was in there. The bill passes. Then we're looking at the bill. It's gone. What happened to it? Nobody knows. Apparently, according to The Nation magazine, the Democrats, specifically Pelosi, came under pressure from AIPAC and other groups to remove that particular sentence from that appropriations bill. So she has, I believe, a lot to answer for. And this issue of impeachment, I'm coming back to it again, is extremely important for moral reasons. I don't care about the pragmatic arguments, because that's what the Democrats are saying. The votes aren't there. It's not about whether the votes aren't there. It's whether you are a person of principle that will stand up and defend the law of the land. Or are you a good German that simply looks away and said, I don't know what was happening? And by not doing anything, by not initiating impeachment proceedings in the House Judiciary Committee, whose chair is John Conyers, who should be hearing from you almost every day, by not doing that, the next administration, the next president, whoever she may be, will say, justifiably, Bush got away with murder. What's stopping me? So that precedent, I think, will be extremely deleterious for our democracy, what's left of it. I mean, it's in a pretty parlous state. Let's not kid ourselves. I mean, there's still a pulse if you go in there and, if you're the cadaver, there's that little, the line is still moving on that machine, but it's in the ICU, it's on respirators, it's on IVs, it's in horrible, horrible shape, and if we don't resurrect the democracy, we are going to turn into the next Rome. We're going to be a runaway military state that is conquering the world and will engender enormous amounts of hostility and hatred. And it's almost, they're not satisfied with what they've done in Afghanistan and Iraq. They want to take the show on to Iran. And when I was in Iran, a lot of Iranians, they were making a really bad joke. They were telling me, David, we know what the Bush exit strategy is out of Iraq. I said, oh, well, please tell me. I'm dying to find out. They're going to come through Iran. Iran has always been in their gun sights from the very beginning. This particular junta, this particular group of warlords, these are real warlords. I mean, the guys in Afghanistan that we call warlords and are described as warlords in the media, they're almost like altar boys compared to and just in terms of scale of violence. I mean, they do terrible things, but they're localized terrible things. The reach of the imperial warlords in Washington is global. And the havoc that they can engender, the chaos, the carnage, the rivers of blood that are flowing in Iraq, over 1 million Iraqis killed, and maybe 1.5 million, 2 million wounded. No one knows exactly. We're not counting. We don't do body counts, as Tommy Franks proudly announced, because they're wogs, not said, of course. They are them. They are the other. They are, Arabs, and they don't matter. But every time some kid from Fort Lewis here or some kid from Fort Carson in Colorado dies, we learn his name, his age. We find out he loved poetry. He was a great fisher person. He loved music. He played a mean guitar, and you identify with them, right? You read these and, God, that could be my son, it could be my brother, it could be my husband. It's just like me, He wanted to be a teacher when he grew up, or he wanted to be a doctor, he was an EMT and he wanted to go back to medical school. And you read these things and quite, it engenders sympathy. It's not a bad thing. But where do you read about, Ali Hussein? Or Hashmat, or Nader Hashemi, or any, Iraqi or Iranian or Kurd or Armenian or Palestinian. They are invisible. They have no lives, they have no aspirations, they have no hopes. And it's our stories that are reified, that are iterated. And that is the inherent racism of this whole imperial project in the Middle East, because it's always about oil, you see. And until and unless we start disabusing ourselves of the fairy tales that enshroud us all, these myth stories about our benign intent, about our benevolence, about our kindness, about how we want to spread democracy and freedom and liberty and share the bounty of these great, political systems of organization to the benighted masses in the third world, or as Conrad says, those with darker complexions than ours and slightly flatter noses, then, we'll never understand what's going on, because we're in a world of Garcia Marquez. We're engaged in magical thinking. Pigs fly. We've created an America that exists perhaps in textbooks only, but not in reality. So it's incumbent, and here you make the connection with the media, since the American people, most people are heavily dependent on media for information. They are subject to being they're acutely vulnerable to being manipulated and to being propagandized. And it's very hard to tell people that they are subject to propaganda. What do you mean? I go into a store, there are 800 magazines, I turn on the radio, there are 50 different stations, AM, FM, there are 500 channels on cable TV. No one tells me what to do or what to see or what to think. But the system of propaganda here is insidious, and it is invasive, and it is extensive. And until and unless, we really build an independent media that is not yoked to the war chariot in Washington, that it is not yoked to the imperial war machine, it's going to be very, very difficult for people to get a handle on reality. So that's another project that we have to work on. And there has been some movement, some development in this area. The United States has an extensive community radio network, for example. That's where I come from. That's how I learned what I'm doing. KGNU in Boulder took me on with no background, no training, and I started doing radio in Boulder. There's WMNF in Tampa, St. Pete. There's KBOO in Portland, Oregon. There's WRT in Madison. I mean, there's a whole range of community radio stations. And now we have such, spectacular programs like Amy Goodman's Democracy Now!, which just celebrated its 10th anniversary. It started off in 1996 as a temporary program. It was on 5 radio stations, the 5 Pacifica stations. And, when the election, the 96 election, was going to take place, it would disappear. But there was a tremendous clamoring to keep it on the air. So there are some glimmers of light, and those lights, we need to expand them. We need to make them shine. And so they need your support. So building an independent media is a very important part of the democratic movement of democratizing the country. Well, when I was in Iraq, I did talk to a lot of Iraqi refugees, and it is the largest refugee crisis in the world today. But you wouldn't know it from reading the newspaper of record, the New York Times, which regularly runs full-page ads about Darfur and how terrible things are in Darfur, and please do something, stop the genocide, stop the killing. And these are good things. I'm not saying this is a bad thing, but Darfur dwarfs in comparison to what is going on in Iraq. 3 million Iraqis are internally displaced. Huge swaths of the country have been ethnically cleansed. About 3 million are now living in Syria, in Lebanon, in Jordan, in Egypt, and in Turkey, and in Iran. The one country that doesn't let them in at all is that moderate progressive Muslim state that we all love, Saudi Arabia, arguably the most fundamentalist regime in the world, homophobic, misogynist, racist, patriarchal in the extreme. In the media, our liberal media, it is routinely called a moderate state. I mean, this is quite a leap of imagination to call states like Mubarak's Egypt and Abdullah's Jordan and the Saudi dynasty in Riyadh as a moderate state. Yet this passes in the discourse with no comment whatsoever. 50 to 100,000 Iraqis are leaving the country every month. 80% of Iraqis do not have access to clean water. Do you think that makes a difference? There is now rampant diarrhea, dysentery, hepatitis, typhus, cholera. For the first time in modern Iraq's history, there is incidence of cholera. 9 of its 18 provinces have reported cholera. Thousands and thousands, of course, perhaps 1.2 million Iraqis have been killed. There's less electricity than before. Garbage is piled high in the streets. There's no sanitation to speak of. Yes, and I know I have to raise my hand like everyone on the left and do the 30 seconds of, yes, Saddam Hussein was terrible. He did horrible things. He killed so many people and he was a butcher and all. Yes, 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 yes. We know all of those things. If you ask any single Iraqi today, the ones I talked to, the refugees, every single one of them said that they long for the days of Saddam Hussein, when there was security in Iraq. Of course, they knew, you had to walk the straight and fine line. And they knew the parameters, like like the Soviet Union. If you stayed within those parameters, you are absolutely, okay. Women could walk in total safety at 2, 3 o'clock in the morning. Schools were open. Iraq had the best educational system in the Middle East. It's now exceeded by Iran, by the way, which has a very high literacy rate and a very high rate of training women. 65% of all college and university students in Iran today are women. And when I was there, I noticed, in the media, tremendous representation from women in medical professions, in the sciences, engineering, architecture, etc. None, of course, in government. And Shireen Ebadi, a Nobel Prize winner, who I will talk about soon. So I know I'm going back and forth between Iran and Iraq, but I just want to impress upon you that this is one of the uncontroversial war crimes in all of human history, certainly in the lifetime of many of the people in this room, and absolutely deserves some kind of accountability. Someone has to pay for the crimes of invasion. Literally with jail sentences, because every single one of these guys that was involved, and women that were involved in the planning and waging of this war against a country not threatening the United States, and who are now planning another war against a country not threatening the United States, should be held accountable. And also we should be talking about reparations to the Iraqi people for the enormous destruction that the American military invasion and occupation has caused in Iraq. Iraq is a failed state, but I don't say that in the passive voice, because that's how the Fund for Peace described it. It listed Iraq as a failed state. Like, it rained, people died. It was a tragedy. There was a car accident. There's no agency. How did Iraq become a failed state? Because of the U.S. invasion, cause and effect. And so that's why I'm, at every opportunity, I want to, talk about this particular issue of reparations, war crimes, and accountability. And just one more thing on Iraq before I focus more on Iran. There was this dog and pony show on, curiously, September 11th in Washington. You remember when General David Petraeus and Ryan Crocker, who's the viceroy of Iraq, also called the U.S. ambassador, and Petraeus is the commander of the so-called coalition, which is a joke. We're talking about a few Lithuanians, Armenians, Georgians, Latvians. The British have completely withdrawn to a base outside of Basra. They don't dare come out, and they're paring down their troops. Australia still has a force in Iraq, but all the signs point to John Howard being defeated next month in Australia, and those troops will be withdrawn. So every time, those words, coalition forces, come out of these guys' mouth, I just wince. Yeah, right. Real coalition. The U.S. is calling all the shots. And you should completely, disabuse yourself of anything else. That's the reality of what's going on. So you have this dog and pony show going on, and Petraeus is, they're talking now Anbar province. This is the model. This is the success. This is what we should be doing. We're finally getting it right. And first we learn that the Sunni tribal sheikhs, in almost a replication of what the British did in 1920 when they took over Iraq from the Turks, they cemented alliances with various clan chieftains. And these Sunni tribal sheikhs in northwestern Iraq, which is a huge landmass, by the way, it's very, very large, they were formerly killing Americans, and now they apparently have been persuaded about the genius of democracy and God, because God is speaking through Bush, and Bush speaks to us. That they have seen the light about liberty and freedom, and now they're supporting the Americans. Now you may think, well, this is a remarkable conversion here. What did Petraeus leave out of this particular story? One slight fact. Can you see this? It's a wad of, I wish it were $100 bills. It's a wad of $1 bills. These guys were all paid off. They were all bribed. And that's how they have now become fair weather friends of the Americans. Another thing the dear general left out is that the province was ethnically cleansed of all Shias. And the third thing, which is perhaps the most important of all, is that it only contains about 2 or 3% of the entire Iraqi population. There's hardly anyone that lives there. And so to use this as the model is completely false. Nevertheless, the great leader flies to Anbar province in early September in the middle of the night, and no one knows about it because obviously Iraq is such a success story and there are no security problems. And he has the troops hoo-haing and, these kinds of what I call electronic Nuremberg rallies. A whole series of them were held before present and former military personnel. The first one is with the Veterans for Foreign Wars. Then that was followed by the American Legion. Then it was he went to the Quantico base in Virginia. And if you want to understand how this really works, I commend to you the wonderful documentary by the German filmmaker Leni Riefenstahl called Triumph of the Will. How to orchestrate a kind of electronic Nuremberg. This literally was a Nuremberg rally, not ersatz or faux. It is a documentary on the 1934 Nazi Party rally in Germany. And it's very, very effective use of cameras and angles and music, and very imaginative. It was a revolutionary work in terms of cinematography and conception. Today, she is routinely dismissed as, a Hitler sympathizer and as a Nazi fellow traveler and the like, but an impressive work. And you see how people are manipulated with the flags, the trumpets, the torchlight parades, and very handsome men and women who apparently have no body fat, no acne, have perfect hair, are well-toned and muscled, like us. And the joke is made, by the end of the film, you're ready to join the Nazi party. I mean, this looks like wonderful. These people are like so healthy and heroic, and they want to help their country, and they want to defend themselves against, the red menace, the red tide coming from the east, and on and on. And so these kind of electronic Nuremberg rallies have been orchestrated to whip up a frenzy to defend ourselves against Iran, this huge military juggernaut that, as I described, is right off Vashon Island as we speak. In fact, I've seen we're laughing, but I've actually seen the Iranian Navy. And, I was trembling. The kayaks, the rowboats, the refurbished yachts, the diesel submarines, which they got from the old Soviet Union, that are so loud that if one was in fact off of Bainbridge Island or in the Puget Sound, we wouldn't even need a sonar here. We could hear it. That's how loud they are. That's the extent of the Iranian Navy. But of course, the United States has 3 aircraft carrier battle groups positioned right off the Iranian coast. So imagine again, if Iran, which doesn't have a navy, positioned its armadas off of Puget Sound or New York Harbor, what the response might be. And you remember I said the United States spends $750 million a year, $750 billion a year on the military. Do you know how much Iran spends, the Iranian military budget? The high-end figure. I'm not going to give you the low-end figure. Let's err on the high-end figure. $5 billion. That's what Iran spends on its military. How much is $5 billion? I mean, it's not chump change, but it's 1 week that we spend in Iraq. 1 week. It's 2 B-2 bombers. The U.S. military war budget of $750 million is more than all the militaries in the world combined spend on the military. You know, and we're not talking about Sierra Leone. We're talking about serious, large countries like Russia, India, France, Britain, Italy, Germany, Japan, China, etc. So you see, you know, if you know these things, you see, wait a second, how could Iran be a threat? They've never aggressed against, anyone in the last 250 years. They've made no threatening comments about the United States. They have said, if, we are attacked, we will defend our country, as anyone would. So why should we be led down this primrose path again of war? At one of these talks that Bush gave that I referred to, of course, he started right off with the whopper. Coalition forces seized rockets that had been manufactured in Iran. The attacks on our bases and our troops by Iranian-supplied munitions have increased. I have ordered my commanders to confront Tehran's murderous activities in Iraq. Well, that was a relief. I was, when they keep saying that, Iran is interfering in Iraq, a country with which it shares a long border, long civilizational ties. At any given time, there are hundreds of thousands of Iranians inside of Iraq because the two most important shrines for Shias, not just Iranian Shias are 90% of the population, Muslim population of Iran. Those shrines are not in Saudi Arabia. They are in Iraq. The shrine of Imam Ali at Najaf and Imam Hussein at Karbala. And it's the dream of many Iranian Shias and Lebanese Shias I've met, Turkish Shias, to go to Iraq and to perform the pilgrimage there. So there are very close ties between Iran and Iraq. In fact, the chief Ayatollah that you hear somewhat about, his name is Ali Sistani, is actually Iranian. So there are very close connections between these two countries. And Iran historically had ruled, when there was the Persian Empire, Mesopotamia was under Persian, at that time called Persian, Iranian control. So there's been just a long civilizational contact there. And so it's, there are national interests for Iran in its neighboring country. Yet the U.S. is talking about, Iran is interfering in Iraq. Iran is meddling in the internal affairs of Iraq. What is the dispatch of 180,000 troops and 170 to 180,000 mercenary contractors to Iraq? Can that be classified as meddling and interfering in Iraqi, no one points out these contradictions. It's so blatant, it's so transparent, and it's astonishing. I mean, Orwell must be flipping in his grave, at these kinds of propaganda stunts that the media engage in and don't report on. You hear a lot about, let's just give you another example. Iran, should not be developing nuclear energy. It should not be enriching uranium. Why? Because Iran has plenty of oil. Why does it need to develop this alternative source of energy? Well, in the United States of amnesia, where we all live, the USA, there's no memory. As I said, educational system doesn't educate, media doesn't inform. You could go back to 1974, as I do in both these books talking about Iran, and notice that the Shah, who was our favorite leader and representative in the Middle East, told Washington, he said, oil is a finite resource. Sooner or later, it's going to end. I have to think about the future energy needs of my Iranian people. Therefore, I wish to develop, alternative sources of energy. And Kissinger is the Secretary of State, Gerald Ford is the President, and they're saying, "Great Shah, you are a genius. Shahan Shah, Mr. Shah, Shah Sahib, whatever they call him, Master Shah, Monsieur Shah, Shahan Shah, yeah, Emperor of Emperors." You are a sagacious, wise man. You are thinking about the future of your country. You have recognized that oil is a finite resource. Let us sell you GE reactors. And we will sell you. And they did. They sold them 6 reactors. Now, 30 years later, when another Iranian leader, who of course is not in favor in Washington, makes the exact same comment that oil is rapidly now 30 years have passed. It's even more depleted than it was in 74 when the Shah made this announcement. Then the U.S. says that this can't be. They've got all this oil. In fact, that's what Kissinger told the great Charlie Rose, who didn't challenge him on this particular question. He said, look, they've got all this oil. It's obviously this is a ruse. It's a ploy to develop nuclear weapons. Iran is a signatory to the Non-Proliferation Treaty, as is the United States. Israel, Pakistan, and India, all armed to the teeth, are not signatories and are therefore not subject to any of the requirements of the NPT, the Non-Proliferation Treaty. If we had a media that reported, we would know that the United States itself is in violation of the Non-Proliferation Treaty, because one of the conditions of the signatories is that those states that have weapons of mass destruction are required to pare down their arsenals. That's not what's happening. They're increasing their arsenals. They're expanding into a new generation of nukes, these so-called smart nukes, leaner, faster, etc. No discussion of that in the media as well. And then you have, I was in Detroit recently. This is the classic conundrum that is facing America today on Iran. Sanctions or war. That's it. Those are your choices. Discussions, negotiations, sit down, talk over different, that's not on, in the realm of possibility. So pick your poison, sanctions or war. Every Iranian I spoke to when I was there, official and unofficial, said they want relations with the United States. They recognize certain realities in terms of, military disparities and the like. They know geography. They see American troops on their eastern border in Afghanistan. They see American troops on their western border in Iraq. They look at the Persian Gulf, which should be renamed a Great Lake of the United States. It's full of American armadas. And when I say aircraft carrier battle groups, it's not just an aircraft carrier, right? It's cruisers, destroyers, submarines, minesweepers, Marine Corps battalions, helicopter gunships, F-16s, all kinds of weaponry. So it's an armada. And one of the ironies here, to connect some history, one of the battle groups is called the Eisenhower Aircraft Carrier Battle Group. So now we go a little bit full circle. Remember Eisenhower, 1961 military-industrial complex? Eisenhower, 1953, President of the United States, launches a CIA coup in Iran called Operation Ajax, which destroys Iranian democracy and restores the Shah to power. This is one of the seminal events, not just in Iranian history, but in all of Middle Eastern history. When I was lecturing in Lebanon and Syria a couple of years ago, and I was talking about this, thinking, well, they probably have heard about it, somewhere on the periphery. I was just so overwhelmed by the level of knowledge and detail that people in those countries had about this particular coup, because this was the template. This was the first CIA operation in which they overthrew a government. Many more were to follow. In fact, in the very next year, another popular democracy was crushed in Guatemala, Jacobo Arbenz, with many of the very same tactics. The coup was run by Kermit Roosevelt, the grandson of Teddy Roosevelt. It was conducted out of the U.S. Embassy in Tehran. Let me tell you just very briefly, for the Iranian brothers and sisters here, they know the history, but who is Mohammad Mossadegh? Very interesting man. You would describe him as a kind of centrist, a moderate liberal, a kind of a lowercase Democrat, who was a nationalist. And if you would have gone to Iran in 1946, 47, 48, you would have found one of the most impoverished countries on Earth. People living in mud huts, no facilities whatsoever, running water, electricity, healthcare, none, schools, none, roads, none, no facilities, nothing. Extremely, extremely poverty-stricken. Meanwhile, Iran has one of the greatest caches of oil in the world, but there's a slight problem. It's completely controlled by a Western oil corporation. In fact, the forerunner of today, that great environmental corporation, British Petroleum. 100% of the profits from Iranian oil were being repatriated out of the country. They were going to banks in London and New York. And Mossadegh, I have to confess that he was enormously disadvantaged in one respect. He was educated in France, at the Sorbonne. You know, only the premier university, not only in France, but probably in Europe. So he didn't have the benefits of Harvard or Yale or Princeton or Cal or UW, you know, some of our great institutions of lower education, as I call them. They get way too much credit. And Mossadegh thought, well, this is not just. This scenario is not just. He was also a very naive man. He actually believed that the Americans were different from the British and the French and the Russians, the empires of his generation. He thought that the Americans were really about liberty and democracy and freedom. And there's a very famous photograph of him. It's heartbreaking, actually, his naivete. He visited the Liberty Bell in Philadelphia, and there's a famous photograph of him looking up at it. He's like a child, in the presence of Madonna or some, super icon like that. There's just such awe and reverence in his eyes. And so he thought that he also did not understand what Kissinger would call realpolitik. That is, what's yours is mine, what's mine is mine. The fact that you have resources in your country is just an accident of geography. That oil belongs to us. In fact, George Kennan, one of these liberal State Department icons in the post-World War II, actually refers to our oil, the oil in the Middle East, as our oil. This was the organizing principle of U.S. foreign policy in the Middle East in the post-1945 era. There's a State Department document, so it isn't about pomegranates and watermelons. That was just a joke, in case any of you believe me. And I know. I'm sorry to disappoint you, but it is about oil. The State Department issues a document saying that the oil of the Middle East constitute the greatest strategic prize in the history of the world. And this becomes the focus, the obsession of U.S. policymakers, how to grab the oil. And there were a few problems. One is the presence of the old European empires. The French, who were already kind of marginalized because they were in Lebanon and Syria where there was no oil to speak of. But it was the British that were, still there, and the sun still had not set on the British Empire yet. As Tariq Ali tells the joke, the reason the sun never set on the British Empire is that God didn't trust them in the dark. So he constantly had to have a light on them. I'm glad you're laughing. It's really good to, everyone, of course, will be paid off who have been laughing at my jokes. It's much appreciated. And the British controlled Iraq. It was a de facto colony. They actually had Kuwait. It was a de jure colony, part of the British Empire. And they were in Iran significantly. So the CIA coup that Eisenhower okays serves two purposes. Not only does it destroy democracy in Iran, it has the demonstration effect of showing the rest of the world, look out. If you think about nationalizing your resources, these are the consequences. The other benefit for Washington was it edged out the British from Iran. Now you have the introduction of American power in one of the most strategic countries in the Middle East. And as I said, the embassy was the locus of the coup there. There was black propaganda planted in the Iranian media. Classic case. We see it over and over again in Panama, in Chile, in Guatemala, in the Dominican Republic, in Brazil, wherever there have been CIA coups, in Venezuela in 2002, same kind of black propaganda. In this case with Mossadegh, he was actually a communist. That's what the Americans were telling the Iranians, that you would not be able to practice Islam. You'd have to learn Russian. Iran would become a colony of the Soviet Union, and that kind of thing. And then payoffs. Again, it's always handy to have wads of $100 bills when you're conducting foreign policy. Payoffs to Iranian military officers to participate in the coup. And so the coup takes place. Mossadegh is overwhelmed. He doesn't have a chance. He's put under house arrest. The Shah, who is in exile in Rome, is flown back on a CIA plane to Tehran and resumes, sitting on the peacock throne in Iran. And, again, actions have consequences. And even the CIA had a hint that this could have some negative repercussions in the future. Every time they conduct an operation, they have a post-ops report. It reads like a sports report. Should have done this. This pinch hitter would have been terrific in the 8th inning. Why was he used in the 3rd inning? We should have brought this reliever in to, replace the starting pitcher. All of those kinds of, considerations. Good things, bad things. And then, interestingly, they use the term blowback for the first time. It's the first time this term is ever used. It means the unintended consequences of U.S. foreign policy. And so the blowback that was predicted or mentioned in the CIA report was that somewhere down the line, this could have very negative ramifications. And of course, it was prescient. It did have negative ramifications because after almost 2.5 decades of the Shah's rule, and basically he was the American puppet there, buying billions of dollars in gold-plated weaponry, F-4s and other gold-plated weapons that he could never use. The Shah is overthrown in the Islamic Revolution of 1979. So we see again, time and again, actions have consequences. U.S. goes into Iraq, shock and awe, mission accomplished, sweets and flowers, liberation, cakewalk, all of that. Well, what has happened to Iraq? The destruction of a country. And whether it will be able to reconstitute itself again is problematic. I mean, that is the level of carnage and mayhem inside of Iraq today. So actions have consequences. The Saudis and the Americans support the most extreme fundamentalist elements in the Islamic world, bring them to Pakistan, to the training camps along the frontier, train them, they become the mujahideen, who Reagan called freedom fighters and compared to the founding fathers. And who did they become after they drive out the Soviet Union? Many of them morphed into the Taliban and into Al-Qaeda. Actions have consequences, and an attack on Iran will have enormous consequences. Iran is not some Grenada or Panama or some banana republic that could just be whisked away by shock and awe. For those of you who know anything about Iran and its culture and history, one thing that has always struck me is a strong sense of Iranianness among Iranians, like Iraniyat. It's like there's a tremendous pride in the culture, in the civilization. They're very quick to tell you, we are not Arabs. We don't speak Arabic. Yes, our Farsi is written in Arabic, but it is our language. It's an Indo-European language. It's closer to Urdu and Pashto and Dari and Bangla and other Hindi and languages like that. It has very little connection to Arabic, except for the religious Quranic terminology, which is borrowed, of course. But the Iranians added 4 letters to the Arabic alphabet of 28 to accommodate their own sounds, like the j in Ahmadinejad. That's an Iranian sound. And they're very proud of their history and their culture. This year, we're celebrating, the world is celebrating the 800th birthday of Maulana Jalaluddin Rumi, the great Sufi poet. He wrote in Farsi. He was born in the Persian Empire in what is today Balkh. That's in Afghanistan in the north. But he's considered, part of the great Iranian literary tradition. And it's not just Rumi. You should know that there's Ferdowsi and Jami, Attar, Nizami, Hafiz, Sadi, a whole host of great poets right down to the current period. A couple of years ago, the greatest contemporary Iranian poet, and we talk about him in the chapter with Nahid Muzaffari, this wonderful woman, Iranian woman that I have in the book here on Iranian culture. The greatest contemporary, most popular Iranian poet dies. His name is Ahmed Shamlou. 100,000 Iranians turned out at his funeral to bid him farewell. When Allen Ginsberg, who I had the privilege of knowing, he's been in Boulder for many years at the Naropa Institute, when he died in 1997, I think something like 80 or 90 people turned out for his, to say goodbye to him. And people were impressed. Wow, 80, 90 people, this is quite something. But you see the place that the oral tradition, that poetry has in the Iranian imagination. And every Iranian that I spoke to said that any U.S. attack is going to solidify support for the regime in Tehran. The regime of Ahmadinejad, who is not particularly popular, by the way, recently in municipal elections in Iran, every single candidate associated with him was defeated. There's an enormous amount of opposition to him. He has been literally run off two major campuses, Amir Kabir in Tehran University, and most recently the Danishgah Tehran, the University of Tehran. He barely could get out of his car when students accosted him, calling him a fascist and a dictator, and we want our freedom. And I was talking to some students when I was there, and they were very bitter because many of them have to leave the country to find work. Because there's an enormous amount of unemployment. And the destination is the Gulf. That's where there's work, in Dubai and Abu Dhabi and these and the Emirates. And they told me, we don't need Holocaust conferences. We need jobs. And in reference to this Holocaust conference that Ahmadinejad hosted in Tehran in December, inviting such notorious cranks as David Duke from the United States and Robert Fulson from France. This was a disaster. Not only was it a moral disaster to host such a conference, to have the Iranian government pay for these people, to put them up in a 5-star hotel, to give them that kind of forum and legitimacy, but it was also a huge public relations disaster. Every single Iranian that I spoke to felt great discomfort and shame. Why do we have to do that? It was a stupid thing to do. We have so many problems. Why are we, focusing on this kind of issue? So it had been he's very, very unpopular, but he's not the final say in Iran, and this was something that the media completely missed when he was in New York the week of September 24th to address the United States nations, when the New York Post headline was "The madman has landed," and the Daily News said "The evil is here," and then the Columbia University president, he was very virtuous in denouncing Ahmadinejad, a very easy thing to do, primarily to placate his alumni who are paying his salary and who threatened some kind of retribution because they were very unhappy that Columbia had given the Iranian president a forum to speak in New York. And so the real power in Iran is held by the Rebbe, the supreme leader, the Ayatollah, in this case Ali Khamenei. And he has final say on all important domestic and international issues. Iran is not a banana republic. It will fight back. It can inflict quite a bit of damage on the United States. It has surface-to-surface missiles that can attack the U.S. fleets in the Gulf. It has allies in Afghanistan, where half the population speaks Farsi. It has major allies in Iraq, not just its Shia co-brethren, who are about 65% of the Iraqi population, but practically the entire political leadership in Iraq today owes its allegiance to Tehran. That's where they were, they went for safe haven when Saddam Hussein attacked Iran in September of 1980, when the United States and the so-called international community had nothing to say about international law, had nothing to say about the violation of the sovereignty of a member state of the United Nations, had nothing to say about Nuremberg principles and of aggression, etc. The Iranians noted this, by the way. They also noted the silence from Washington when Saddam Hussein used chemical weapons on Iranian troops, and Iran did not retaliate with biological and chemical weapons, which it had and could have used in its defense. It heard the silence. It was deafening. It heard the silence in July of 1988 when a U.S. warship in the Persian Gulf blows up an Iranian jetliner flying in international airspace, killing 290 Iranians. It's always good to have controls, and you'll remember 5 years before that to compare things. You have, some like textbook examples. 5 years before that, you remember the horrible Soviet Union shot down the Korean airliner, and Reagan was going on and on. This shows Moscow's perfidy. This shows their evilness and how barbaric they are, and they just kill innocent women and children. There's some evidence that that plane was in Soviet airspace. That still, it's inexcusable that it was shot down. What was the response in 1988 when this U.S. warship shoots an Iranian airliner out of the sky, killing 290 Iranians? Well, you probably think, the commander must have been court-martialed. He was probably demoted, maybe even served some jail time. That would be interesting. No, au contraire. He got a medal when he returned back to the United States. In 1992, when Bush père, George Herbert Walker Bush was running for re-election, someone on the campaign trail, I don't know, this was obviously some loose cannon, asked him about the Vincennes, and that there's evidence that this was a civilian aircraft. It was flying in international airspace. It was nowhere near the U.S. warship on routine naval patrols in the Persian Gulf. We are the only country in the world that conducts routine naval patrols in other people's airspace for the Air Force and seascape. Imagine if the Iranian Navy or the Afghan Navy or the Armenian Navy came to Puget Sound and said they were conducting routine naval patrols. We Armenians, we want to understand the currents of Puget Sound and feel the salt water and see the Seattle skyline so our people can have a better understanding of America and this region. You're laughing, but you can imagine what the response would be. There was a ship, another U.S. ship right next to the Vincennes when this was going on, and the captain noticed that the Vincennes, this is the U.S. destroyer that launches an Aegis cruise destroyer, launches the missiles. The captain of the other ship says, something's going on here. They've locked on to a civilian airliner. It was very clear to him it was a civilian airliner. And, what is he doing? And before anything, can I get him on the phone or, let's send him an email or something. There was no email then. Before he could do anything, the plane was shot out of the sky. In 1992, Bush is on the campaign trail, and some reporter, really intemperate, I must say, said that, brought up this whole issue of what happened to the Iranian Airbus. And it looks like, they weren't doing anything. They were a threat to no one. What happened here? His exact words, which any Iranian can quote you, is, "I don't care what the facts are. I will never apologize for the United States of America." People have feelings, believe it or not. Even Iranians, even Iraqis, they care about things like that. And when they hear things, that kind of arrogant, hubristic, imperial statements, it really affects them, understandably so. Now I just want to finally, that's an applause line, folks. In other, I don't want to like, in other audiences, people, they get on their feet. It's a standing ovation, right? And you hear the gasp. It's great for radio. Gasp. Woo! Finally, that Woody Allen wannabe. I thought he'd never finish. God, he just goes on and on. Just another smart-ass New Yorker. Thinks he knows all the answers. Damn. Woo! I want to talk a little bit about Shireen Ebadi, who was referred to by a member of the audience a little earlier. She won the 2003 Nobel Peace Prize. A very distinguished lawyer, judge, human rights activist. She lost her job under the Islamic regime of Iran, under this administration, not the previous administration of Mohammad Khatami. And I had the opportunity to talk to her, and so this is in the introduction that I wrote for the book. She told me that the Iranian people are exceedingly proud of their long history and culture. And this is a really interesting comment because it really shows her time frame and what she thinks about the Islamic Republic. She says, Iran as a country is larger and greater than its rulers and exists apart from any government in power at any particular time. But then she warns, if America attacks, however, Iranians will unite, forgetting their differences with their government, and they will fiercely and tenaciously defend their country. I was just reading almost verbatim the exact same words from the journalist Akbar Ganji, who has spent a number of years in Iranian jails because of his political opposition to the regime. There is a democracy movement in Iran. There is a feminist movement in Iran. There's, as I said, women are highly educated. They're highly motivated. They're in most of the technical professions, but they're also in the film industry. Iran, it's worth saying, has one of the most sophisticated film industries in the world. Extraordinary for a country of 70 million people. Some fantastic filmmakers. You can get many of these films, Majidi and Mokhlabaf and Kiarostami and Panahi Ghobbadi. There's a whole range of them. Marvelous, marvelous filmmakers of cultural and of enormous, I would say, subtlety and accomplishment, because they have a very narrow line that they have to walk. They have to be exceedingly careful what they say, about sexuality or justice or freedom or democracy. So everything is double entendre. Almost everything has double meanings, and that's how they navigate those kinds of restrictions and constraints. And then Ebadi, I also met her in Denver when she visited, and she said on that occasion, democracy cannot be brought to a people with cluster bombs. Seems obvious. Democracy cannot be delivered from the bomb bay doors of a B-52 or out of a helicopter gunship or from F-16s. It has to be something organic. It has to come up from the soil of the people. It cannot be imposed, particularly from mostly white, mostly Christian people living 12,000 miles away who know nothing about Iran, who know nothing about Iranian culture and history, or the Middle East for that matter. Every Iranian talks about this. And she says, any military invasion or even the threat of one harms democracy. It is not something that happens overnight. Democracy needs to evolve in a peaceful atmosphere, and the United States, she warns, must not impose it on Iran or any other country. It will be a disaster if it tries. And I noticed when she was telling me this, she was in acute physical discomfort. And I said, can I get you some water? Are you okay? And she said, I have terrible sciatica. And I said, well, what do you do? What kind of, medication? How do you relieve that pain and discomfort? She says, I read Persian poetry. I learned this, I made a fool of myself in Iran on many occasions, incidentally, but on this particular one, I happened to ask an Iranian if he liked poetry. And if any of you know anything about, as I said, Iranian culture, it's like asking someone, do you like fresh air? Do you like to breathe? I really that one was really bad. And so I said, well, what poetry do you read? And can you recite a particular poem that you like? She said, I really like Hafiz Shirazi, one of these great Sufi masters. And she told me this particular poem. If there is no justice, then those who are deprived may one day take to the streets and rise up. If there is no justice, then those who are deprived may one day take to the streets and rise up. We could apply that right here to the United States, where there is less and less justice, where there is more and more militarization, where there is more and more invasions of privacy and undermining of our basic human and constitutional rights. We should think about that. We should think about and demand that all U.S. troops be withdrawn from Afghanistan and Iraq. Not next year, not the year after, not in 2030, but right now, and no attack on Iran. Thank you very much. Mutashakkaram, merci, kheli mamnoon. Thank you very much. Those were my opening remarks. I have a prepared speech. I worked on it all last night for hours. How are we doing on time? Okay, we're going to have to forego my formal presentation then, and maybe go right into the Q&A. I believe there are microphones here. Our wonderful friend Ed Mays is here from Seattle, who does a terrific public service in filming a lot of events and then presenting them on cable access. Thank you, Ed, and to KEXP for recording, and KUOW as well. The light is kind of in my face, but yes, ma'am.
Getting back to this getting back to the question of impeachment and the question you posed about why the Democrats are not doing anything, and it, given how good politicians are at sort of seeing which way the wind is blowing, there's all this sentiment, these votes in town meetings across the country for impeachment and most people being for it. It does seem really odd that, there's such resistance to considering it. But as you were going on and talking about things like the Nuremberg tribunals and jail time for war criminals, I just started wondering if maybe one of the things that could be, giving the Democrats pause is the fact that they've been complicit in so many of these crimes. And, I remember Barbara Lee being the only person in all of Congress voting against the invasion of Afghanistan, or Russ Feingold being the only person in the whole Senate to vote against the Patriot Act, these repeated, votes to fund the war. And I was just wondering what you think of that as a possible reason that the Democrats, could they be fearing that
well, I think
people start looking too closely? Yeah.
They want to win the White House, and they think that if they introduce articles of impeachment and they don't have the votes, in the Senate to get a conviction, they may have the votes in the House, quite conceivably, but they certainly don't have the necessary number in the Senate. I feel it's a totally opportunistic thing that they're doing, that they have surrendered principle to the altar of, gaining the White House in 2008. There have been comments that, impeachment would be very messy. It would divide the country. The country is not only divided, it's quartered an eighth. That's how divided the country is. And there's an enormous amount of sentiment, incidentally, for impeachment, as the sister mentioned. 54% of Americans consider Cheney impeachable. That's 8% more than Bush. Now, it's interesting. Why is this interesting, this figure? Because it's not being discussed anywhere. How are people reaching that, I think, astute conclusion if it's not part of the discourse, if it's not part of the, the Supersonics post-game show? And why did they trade Ray Allen? How did this come into the kind of, the collective consciousness? I think, people have figured out for themselves, but the Democrats, if JFK, one of their idols, if he were alive today, he'd write a book called Profiles in Cowardice. He He wrote a famous book when he was a senator from Massachusetts called Profiles in Courage. But I think this is an important moral issue, and I think you should put pressure on McDermott and Conyers, who is the chair of the House Judiciary Committee, who is empowered legally to introduce articles of impeachment. And he indicated that he would do that or consider that before the Democrats, took over in November of '06. And obviously somebody got to him and said, cool it. Let's not go there. I think we need to go there. I think it's morally imperative that we do, and I cannot stress that more emphatically. Did you see the Bill Moyers Journal program a couple of months ago? It's the only thing worth watching on PBS practically. He had a program on with Bruce Fein, who is a Reaganite Justice Department official, very conservative, straight-laced Republican to the core, and John Nichols of The Nation magazine, who you would expect to be for impeachment. In fact, Fein was just simply out-eloquent and out-articulated even Nichols, and made a very forceful case for impeachment, reading the letter of the law, right down the list of war crimes, international as well as national. There was such a response to this program that apparently for the first time in Moyers' some 30-odd years in public broadcasting, he repeated it within 3 or 4 weeks. So maybe some of you saw the second edition of that. The entire text is at pbs.org. You can read it for yourselves. So it shows that there is, I think, quite a bit of sentiment in the country for justice, because this is an issue of justice. It's for the Iraqi people, it's for the Afghan people, it's for the Palestinians, it's for, all of the oppressed people in the world, and it is also for us. It is for our moral well-being.
My friend Kevin Danaher, he talks about how people fall in this country for the stupidest things. It's like, he says Nicaragua's going to get your mama. Well, Panama's going to get your mama. And I have an aunt that she just falls for it every time. And I says, well, at what point are you not going to fall for it? And, obviously they're not worried about Iran getting a bomb, and people never think of the fact that, so what if they got it? So what if Iran got a bomb, or 2, or 3, or 4? It's not ever, they have no way to deliver it against us or Israel or anybody right at this point. Anyway, so that's a canard too. But there are a certain number of people that will fall for it, but most of them seem to be in the Congress. But, what is it that really that gets them so obsessed about Iran?
What is it that gets them so obsessed about? I'll answer your question.
They can't go in there and steal the oil. They can't even occupy Iraq. So they're not going to be able to go in there and take the oil. The only thing they can really do is just bomb them to smithereens. So what do they really want to do here?
The answer is very clearly, I think, this is payback for 1979. The United States has never accepted the Islamic Revolution and the overthrow of the Shah, who was their golden boy. He was their ATM machine. As long as he was in Tehran, he was cranking out billions of dollars that were flowing into the coffers of these military-industrial contractors. And so it was a huge blow to American hegemony. What we say goes. What's yours is mine. What's mine is mine. But really, this addresses a fundamental issue of all U.S. foreign policy, particularly since the end of World War II. As Arundhati Roy once told me, it's very dangerous to be a tall poppy. It's very dangerous to stand out in that field. You want to be invisible. You want to be below the flower line. Because if you stand up and the hegemon sees you, he'll cut you down. That's why they have to stop Hugo Chavez in Venezuela. That's why they loathe him. Because he stands up and says, we're different. We don't want to be part of the American empire. We want to do things our way. Maybe it's wrong, but it's ours. That's why they loathe Evo Morales in Bolivia. That's why they despise Correa, Rafael Correa in Ecuador and Cuba, and right down through all of the, the history, Allende in Chile and Arbenz and Mossadegh and Bosch in the Dominican Republic. Anyone who stands up, Nasser in Egypt, and defies the Godfather is in for extreme retaliation and retribution. And it's a good, maybe we can actually close with this, because I just noticed it's gotten very, very late, and I do want to sign some, targeting Iran and what we say goes books. But if you really want to understand how United States policy actually works internationally, I think the Godfather model is the one to grasp. You don't have to go to UW to figure this out and to study political science or history for years and years. Or you can just watch 10 minutes of any episode of The Sopranos. As long as you are loyal to the master, to the Godfather, as long as you kiss his hand, genuflect before him, touch his feet, you'll be well looked after and tended to, you'll be honored, you'll be protected, you'll be part of the family, you'll get, you'll get a strawberry cheesecake on your birthday, you'll get flowers on your wedding anniversary, you'll get checks in the mail for your son's tuition or daughter's tuition or whatever. But the moment you break out and say, I want to start my own family, I want to be a godfather too, I'm smart, I got connections, I know people in Jersey, I know people in Brooklyn, I can get going here, why should I give all my loyalty to this guy? I'm smarter than he is, and I'm 30 years younger, give me an opportunity. That can't be tolerated. And so the threat of independent nationalism is really what animates a lot of U.S. foreign policy, not just the oil and the resources, but the idea of a successful model. Why did you think they went after the Nicaraguans the way they did? Because they thought the Sandinistas were going to conquer America? Because they were worried about the Sandinista Navy and, Panzer divisions and Luftwaffe, conquering? Of course not. I mean, if you said that to anyone, they'd start laughing. It is about the threat of a successful example. That's why they went after the FMLN in Salvador as well. See, the empire is extremely intolerant. It doesn't have a philosophy of, Leben and Leben lassen, live and let live. It's live or die. It's not, it has none of the let live, really feeling. It wants to control, it wants to dominate. And that we have to come to terms with that. We have to come to terms with who we are as a people and what we're doing in the world, not the fantasy stories, not the fairy tales about golden slippers. And I think that's incumbent on us all. So I'd be happy to talk to you further over here in Science and Books. Thanks again to Elliot Bay and all of you for coming. Thank you very much.